Meet Sueños, Dazcat 1195. She's just started her very own chapter of a special story that began long before her time. One that she and owners Isa and Rupert have been waiting for patiently since she was launched in 2010. She spent almost the entirety of her 8 years since launch participating in offshore race events like the Fastnet, Round Ireland and French Almond Race, as well as numerous other Mokra and more local events. But this year, after completing her third two-handed Round Britain and Ireland race, she completed a metamorphosis that she's been preparing for since the design stage. She's become a cruiser. I visited Rupert and Isa to find out more of their plans, but I also wanted to hear from Isa the amazing story of how she started sailing and then going on to become an extensive cruiser as a young mum with very young children. Inspirational seafaring tales of high adventure and romance that set the scene for the upcoming adventures on board Sueños. So Rupert, I understand that you have been sailing and racing most of your life.
Yes, that's true, yeah.
When you met Isa, did she sail?
No, she not. I think she'd been on a boat, sailing boat, sort of about 5 minutes once or something.
Okay.
So not at all, no. Basically.
So did you know that this man that you had fallen in love with was in love with the sea, Isa?
And I have to sort of really think, oh my God, am I going to be able to understand what it's all about? Obviously, growing up in the mountains and from Colombia, and even so I live in California, the only experience I ever had was going once in a little hobby car, but that was it.
Okay. How did you reconcile that divide then?
Well, Rupert has had, since we met, had done a two-star?
Yeah.
And he had a Mayday.
I'd already done the single-handed race in 88, and this is in 1990. We were doing the two-handed race, and about 700-800 miles out in the Atlantic, the trimaran converted itself to a catamaran in mid-ocean. Basically, the starboard outrigger broke up and came off. We had to put out a Mayday, and we got picked up by a huge container ship, but we got picked up boat and all. I persuaded them that the safest way to rescue us was to pick up the boat.
With you still in it?
With us still in it, yes.
Great
Having a cup of tea, probably.
And yeah, we never even got our feet wet.
But at that point, Isa, you weren't married and with children,
yeah,
so
you
knew him already.
Yeah. I
okay.
knew about his accident, and I knew about being rescued and taken to Halifax. And
so were you very worried?
Yes, of course, but at the same time, it didn't really click to me. Like I now being aware of how dangerous it was, or what was going on, or how seriously the situation was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, obviously not, because you then went to Nova Scotia and got on the boat.
yes. We came on a boat that had been repaired, having basically broken up in mid-ocean.
And been rescued at sea, yes.
And rescued at sea, that's true.
The boat ended up in Halifax in Nova Scotia, and he wanted to return the boat back to England, so he very nicely invited me to come and have a look at the boat first of all, to see if I liked it. But I say, okay, let's go. I'm trying to understand what this is. And it was out of the water, so it looked gigantic. I said, well, this is not so bad. It's huge. It's fine, no problems. And then we set off, and the only condition I did put is, and obviously he had to have a crew, because I was just a passenger, don't know anything about sailing. And that's when we brought Chris Briggs, who also was novice at that time in sailing, and we set off from Nova Scotia in my first ever sailing trip.
To cross the Atlantic.
To cross the Atlantic. Naive and in love.
Without even a trial sail, I think. That was Fiery Cross, which was a 35-foot racing trimaran, in which I'd done the single-handed race in '88. That was 3 years earlier, and then it had been on the two-handed transatlantic race that the boat broke up when it lost an outrigger in mid-ocean. That's why it was in Nova Scotia. We had the boat rebuilt 2 new aggregates built, and then we were sailing it back via the Azores.
So Isa, you were oblivious to the fact that this was a very sensitive racing boat that could break.
It was, I think I didn't know. It was hit me more when we were getting ready to leave a place in Nova Scotia, when all the locals were amazed. They had never in their history had a yacht going across the oceans from there. And I started wondering, oh my God, what am I doing? Everyone is bringing us gifts and things and wishing me luck. And I was like, oh, I guess this is not normal.
It's just perfectly normal, nothing unusual about it. It's just,
We were heading to the Azores, which Rupert and Chris was going to do the Azores and back race.
The return leg only,
the return leg. And I was going to fly. That was the plan.
And what actually happened?
Well, took a bit longer to get the boat ready in Nova Scotia, so we were a bit late leaving, and then we actually arrived in the Azores an hour and a half before the start of the return leg of the race, but having also starboard forward beam had cracked down the back face. Clearly it was actually a bit more damaged when we lost the outrigger, probably being slammed against the side of the ship than we'd realised, so that had to be repaired, so there was no way we were doing the race back. And it also happened that just before we got in, 5 miles off Ponta Delgado, we'd hit a whale.
We did indeed.
Can you tell me your experience of that, Isa?
Well, before we hit the whale, I felt, honestly, like Christopher Columbus. They say, there is land there. It's Pico or whatever the name was. And I look at it and say, oh my God, this is happening. We're actually going to be close to land. Because when I went in Fiery Cross, I came with a naive illusion that the sea was like the waves you see on the beach. And suddenly I found myself in a submarine, waves coming in every direction. And I was like, oh my God, what is this? So I was really looking forward by then to get to land. Even so, half of the beginning of the journey was stressful. There was at one point a gale that the skipper told us, do you want to come back or should we go ahead? And then we all agreed to carry on because we were going back again to the storm. And then it became
because the boat was broken.
Because the boat was broken too. But it became the most magical time I had ever, because it became from bad weather to beautiful weather, sunset, wearing bikinis, reading books, having brandy with the sunset. It was a completely different experience. Oh my God, I can't believe how it can change. But when we saw the land and say, okay, well, how long does it take to get to land? And say, oh, I don't know, maybe tomorrow. Oh, well, might as well go back to bed. So here I am in bed, when suddenly all I felt is like if you're going extremely fast and you hit a wall in the middle of nowhere, and it went boom, and I just rolled back. And then since then we discovered, and Rupert damaged his shoulder, broke the galley wall. Chris luckily was attached to his harness, then the wheel is ribs, and the boat just didn't carry on, but it did shake us up. We were not really sure at that moment exactly what went wrong, but luckily we managed to carry on and find out the centerboard could not move. It was really jammed. But when I got to land, I did feel like Christopher Columbus.
I'm sure. And it sounds like you experienced pretty much almost everything that could happen on that first journey. Good weather, bad weather, hitting things.
I'm praying everything I knew in one point, which I thought I wasn't going to make it until the next one.
But obviously you decided it was something that you could enjoy doing, and Rupert obviously decided that Isa could make a good crew. And
I'm not sure I decided that at all.
Thank you.
Make a good wife then.
Oh, that's completely different. There, yes. True, I don't know.
I'm still in the working process. Whatever you're saying in English.
And on the first part of the trip, I didn't believe that it was possible for somebody to stay in a bunk for 5 days without ever getting out of it, as far as I could see.
Yeah, you know,
She kept
what's
coming
the
out
point?
and saying,
It was
look,
so
the waves
scary.
look like they're going to eat me.
that was so
And went back to
scary.
bed.
Sounds very sensible, but one way or another, obviously you decided that it had gone well because you then ended up living on board for many years, didn't you?
It converted me into a multi-hull person, sailor. And the motion of a multi-hull is just unbelievably comfortable. Than the only condition I ever said, if you're going to have a boat, it has to be a multi-hull because I don't do monohull. I get seasick and I don't like this tipping business.
Yeah.
No, we held 10 Faricross another about 3 years, and I actually did another round Britain race. We did it in '89, we did it again in '93, and I also did the Azores back in '95, but Isa didn't really come sailing on any of those.
But I did Grand Prix on Island on land as a foreigner, as a tourist, and I should have won all the medals.
You got there before the boat.
She managed to make every port on the round Britain race, which was quite an achievement.
Yes.
To actually get from one place, particularly for somebody who had no knowledge of British Isles as to how you travel around.
Yeah.
But then after that we sold Faricross. There was a out and out racing boat.
Makes it all the more impressive that you did your first sailing trip on that.
Very basic, but in the end of the day, Faricross had everything you could possibly need.
Except the toilet was only a bucket.
Yeah, but there was a seat at least.
A bucket with a seat.
And we did say nothing could go wrong with it, but I was wrong there again. Unfortunately, one day Chris dropped the bucket. In '98, we bought 50-foot Outremer. She went to France to Arcachon to buy. We went all around Europe, even spent some of the time in the States looking for boats. It was much harder then to find a suitable multi-hull.
And you then moved on board?
We moved on board, and by then we had a child. We started from Plymouth. Sarita was
18 months, I think.
18
18 months when we started. We did actually do the Ark in that boat. We did the Ark Atlantic Rally for Cruisers in '98.
Well, Sarita was the youngest sailor they had, and when we were leaving, there was so many people who came in Las Palmas to wave Sarita off. And they had speakers, and we can hear them in the boat screaming, "Good luck, Sarita! All the best!" And she was like the queen.
We were to the crowd.
It was incredible.
21 months of that.
She was in all the newspapers. She
Yeah.
was in. It was
on the front page of the newspaper.
baby of the Ark.
So we got a special cup given by Jimmy Cornell when we got to
And a
St. Lucia.
certificate.
Often over about 5 years, we spent about 2.5 years on the boat. We were debating whether to go round the world or what to do. And then, as it turned out, Isa discovered she was pregnant with Oliver, our son. And so we brought the boat back to the Med. And we carried on sailing in the Med until she was really about 8 months pregnant. And we came back home to have Oliver.
Was that the end of your extensive cruising at that point?
No.
No, it wasn't at all. We left the boat in Menorca, and then we came back when the new baby Oliver was then 5 months. Sailed all the way through the Med, ultimately to Cyprus.
Ended up doing a winter season in Cyprus, and that's when you started. Then went back again to the oil industry.
We actually ended up living back in Colombia. We had some friends actually bring the boat across the Atlantic to Trinidad. Then later, we ended up spending another 5-6 months
With the children older.
with the children older,
Another
4 years after the
generation.
first time, sailing up through the Eastern Caribbean again,
Okay.
which was actually great fun. In fact, I think the second time was actually almost more fun than the first. partly maybe the children were bigger, and also we knew the places.
Yeah.
Which sort of made it all sort of easier and I guess more relaxing.
Isa, what was it like sailing with two very small children?
Well, having other moms to talk about your children and their development and things that happen to them, so it could have been a bit lonely. So I have to guide myself by books. Is this normal? Is this happening? And we became like sort of spotting any boat who will have any resemblance of any children being on it. So there is little teachers or
Magnet.
pushers or something. So it became a hunt to find any other yachts, and we ended up having to meet 22 children in that time. And we, as families who were doing the same as us, and then I didn't feel so deprived, because instead we're playing on the beach, we're going to another treasure hunt, or we're doing fantastic things. And as a couple, we still also managed to have a life, because we managed to train the children well enough that we'll go to a port, we'll take them in the day to have an ice cream to see the place, and then we'll spot the restaurant where we can bring 2 pushchairs and then walk them to sleep, and then order the wine and have a meal, and the kids will go back into the dinghy, life jackets, go to bed, and they didn't wake up. So they got so used to, they were so flexible. I think we were very lucky also having very flexible kids who allow us to be able to have the best of everything.
Well, yeah, I mean, many people used to say you're completely mad taking children at that age on boats, etc. You shouldn't dream of doing it. And like I said, there couldn't be more wrong. I mean, we had a great time.
Not only that, they also had the best, because they had 2 parents 24/7. So having to have that privilege, or having 2 people looking after them for every need, it was amazing. How lucky they were that we were able to do that.
Yeah, and I think I probably do have a different, maybe a better relationship maybe with the children, because I was with them when they were all the time when they were small. Not so much later. Obviously, it was like back to work, and
it was just like living a fantasy life in some sort of ways. And obviously you didn't go any places where weather was bad, or you avoid use technology, and thank God we have a fantastic skipper who look after us. But no, it was fantastic. The experiences, like our daughter swimming with the sharks since she was little, and for her it was fascinating. I was terrified, but she was in heaven.
Sweet. She was then about 6. She had been to school a bit in Colombia, but we realised that our attempts to educate her were not really very successful, and so we needed to basically bring her back to school. And also then it became time to sort of go back to work and get children into proper schools, etc. So that's the point. After that second trip up the Eastern Caribbean, then we brought the boat back to Britain, and only used it occasionally for holidays in the summer. Well, we essentially sold the Outremer about 3 years after we came back. I was actually working for a company in Russia. At that stage, we weren't sailing at all. After I left that company, we wanted something that we could do some racing, but also we could cruise as well. Started talking to Daz and Simon, and ended up having Sueños built, specifically of that, so that we could do the 2010 round Britain race. I could do the 2010 round Britain race, but we'd also have a boat that we would use for cruising.
Okay.
Very much also designed in mind with the intention to have a boat that would still be able to sail in another 10 years' time. And we're actually getting rather close to the 10 years. So we're now through year 8. I suppose the 9th season, I suppose. Yes.
And she's still very saleable, as you've just proved by racing around Britain again.
Raced around Britain 3 times in the Sueños, but 6 times in total.
6 times in total. 6 times in total.
Okay. Twice on Fiery Cross, and once on the 30-foot trimaran I had before that.
Yeah.
I took up the racing because I liked sort of short-handed racing, and I wanted to race fast boats. But also I enjoyed the cruising. We never raced Bagheera. I think once we did round the island race, and came last by a long way.
Oh, because I insisted to keep away from all the other boats. That was too scary. Especially the little ones, and they don't realise you're going faster.
So you were racing with the children.
With the children, small, and I was like, come on, let's just get out of here.
After Rupert got Sueños, you were busy with the children and school and that kind of thing. So is it correct that Sueños has mostly been used for racing, and you've done less?
The majority, yes. We've done a few trips with the children across Brittany, and the usual sort of little local things to Heifer River or the Scilly Isles, but it's mainly been racing because it's just been in the critical ages of the children, A levels and GCSE, so no time, but
okay, but now
it's all changed. Now that finally the youngest Oliver has just finished his A levels, now he's left school. We're no longer tied to being somewhere for them being in school.
And you retire.
I have the time, and we don't have the commitments, so we have the sort of potential freedom to go. And then on top of that, Oliver said, what I'd really like to do would be to go off and sail across the Atlantic. He feels he sort of misses out because he can't really remember, because he was a bit too small the previous time in the Caribbean, because he was too small to have much memories of it. Well, he had a great time when he was there. He was still only 2, only 3, wasn't it? His suggestion. So
well, sailing the Atlantic, just go cruising.
Yes, and so we're not actually necessarily going to cross the Atlantic. We're going to go take the boat down to Portugal, to Lagos. Probably going to come back for a few weeks, things to do, and then we'll go down to the Canaries, and then we'll see. Certainly want to take the boat somewhere warmer for the winter. We may well go across the Atlantic, but we'll sort of.
That's what is the beauty of being able to have the luxury of time, is then you can decide as you come along. Obviously, you have a vision of what you want to do, but it's just like, see how we feel.
No fixed.
Yeah, I mean, I
Exactly.
deliberately
plans,
not participating, like trying to participate in the Ark or do anything like that, so that we just feel free to go and do what we want when we want. And we're also very fortunate that my friend Alan and his wife Sheila want to come with us for some of this. And Alan Mitchell, I did 2 round Britain races on the Fiery Cross back in 89 and 93. It'll be really nice to have them along.
When we were looking for a Sueños boat, both of us make a mental note of what we wanted to have as a future boat, and all the things that we have learned through the years, so what will make it easier for us and what we thought it was valuable to have. And we managed to create all this with Sueños, and this is the name where it comes from, because Sueños means dreams. And as we were signing the contract with us in the pub and say, okay, we're going to do this is everything that we were looking for. And I said in Spanish, it's un sueño, I mean, it's a dream. And Rupert said, what did you say? I said, Sueños. I said, that is the name, because it is everything we always wanted to have. Then we, through all the years, and we say, with the possibilities, because we in the beginning made it as a racer, but since the beginning was the spaces left for like my washing machine, my freezer, and all this sort of comforts.
Except for your clothes.
Except for my clothes, which I'm working on it. So it's just basically a lot of the things that we always wanted to have, and in a boat who the size was more friendly to marinas, friendly to park. Even so, it's a high performers. It still has advantages to have electric winches, and it has aids. So I actually looking forward to have the adventure, if I'm allowed to become the domesticated boat like Bagheera was, once it becomes my home, because when we're sailing it's his machine, when we stop it's my home. So we'll see, because Rupert is very attached to Sueños.
She has been his racing machine, hasn't
for
she?
a long time.
Yes.
So at the moment, slowly I'm sort of building myself into,
just pulling back a little bit. Great.
Trying to explain a little, it doesn't quite have the same weight carrying capacity as a 50-foot boat, but we deliberately wanted a smaller boat because it is just easier particularly for 2 people to manage, and particularly as you get older, it's even more so. Because we found the 50-foot boat was nice, but actually it was quite hard work at times everything you had to do to it was sort of, well, it was physically quite hard. It did feel a bit like, like a big boat.
Yeah.
Where Sueños doesn't really. You can sort of move it around. You can sort of push it off the dock very easily, etc. You couldn't do that. You couldn't do that with the Outremer. You had to, manoeuvre it like a big boat. And also just for the sheer size of where you can get in, etc. Because we used to find, particularly in the Med, that it was quite difficult to get in places. There simply wasn't space for a 50-foot boat.
50 foot and extra wide as well.
Yes, they have the poles in a lot of marinas, so you don't fit in.
A smaller boat from that point of view is better. Everything else is a bit cheaper on a smaller boat.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful boat. I mean,
and it's a lovely boat that does, it does sail well. And one of the reasons why we now have things like water makers is actually water makers are there partially to reduce the weight, because then you don't have to carry the same volume of water around with you, because you can make your own.
So have you been happy with the changes that were made last winter, the solar farm for charging and
I call it the solar farm. The top of the bimini is covered in. Yes, actually it was quite effective. I mean, we tested it round Britain Race, and it was, through the day, it was keeping everything charged. And that's running autopilots, freezer, the chart plotters. It'll be interesting to see as well, particularly when you're down in somewhere where you're getting actually more power from the sun. But of course, what you do get there, you are getting sort of 12-hour nights, so you actually got quite long night period. So I think if you're careful with your power consumption, you can probably get away with not having to charge.
So will that mean that you can carry slightly less fuel as well, or that you can carry the same amount of fuel but don't need to be so concerned?
Yes, I guess carry a bit less fuel, but I mean, basically you more or less, probably the cruising, you're more or less going to fill up with fuel and not worry about it. But I mean, the fuel tanks, I mean, we're only talking about 90 litres each, so it's not it's not a huge
I was just wondering whether Isa could bring more things on board if there was going to be less fuel.
I don't think it's about
more shoes or something.
It's about fighting myself with the amount of spares and tools and equipment and everything that is taking all the lockers. The boat is geared for racing. I have to say, actually, it's like being in a plane. It has everything you could possibly think as an emergency, so that is a relief to know that it's there. So I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining about that. In that case, I feel very safe. But it's just squishing the storage.
Room for the clothes.
Shoes. Well, at the moment, it's just start getting all the sort of meals to put in a new freezer. And organizing, well, the usual thing, the sort of food compartments and clothing, everything is going to be going with the boat. I spent yesterday actually cooking curries, chili con carne, bolognese, tacos, cottage pie, that sort of things. And then finding special things in Amazon to use the measurement to see if it fits bags in lockers and things to do storage for clothes and this. All kinds of different things to come while he's very busy preparing the serious stuff.
I would think that food is quite serious stuff though as well, Lisa.
Just basic boat maintenance.
And we're adding new things. We got now curtains, mosquito nets. It's slowly becoming my home.
Yeah, great.
Yes, I spent a lot of last week putting curtains up. I must admit, putting curtains. Somehow that's not having a sunshade made.
Oh my God, it gets better by the minute. And now we even have extra chairs to put around the cockpit besides the bench that we have, and oh my God, it gets better. I can't wait to see Sueños in the real warm weather, because it must be an amazing boat to be in the warm weather. Well, we have a heating heating in Sueños.
We've got heating
Now
too.
we need is to convert into an aircon instead.
Yes.
Well, we're not doing that.
Now we have the wind and the breeze and the hatches, and will give us enough breeze.
You talked about technology moving on. What about navigation equipment, navigation aids, Rupert? Are you taking your electronic charts? Are you taking paper charts? Sextant?
I'm actually going to go, because one of the things I'm going to do, dig out all the old paper charts. Because from them, actually, most of the time, they don't move the land very much. And actually, all you use is electronic charts, but it's useful to have a few paper ones in case all the electronics stop working. You probably don't need any more paper charts than the ones we've got already that we used 20 years ago.
Previous journeys, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've got a Radio Go system for getting weather information and planning routes, etc. And also acts as a satellite phone. Yeah, a considerable sort of benefit from what we had. 20 years ago, we used to get weather faxes, so it was terribly laborious to download them, etc. So this is a dramatic improvement upon that. So that's good. So when you're crossing oceans, you can tell whether you can see where the weather is.
Yeah.
So that way you can avoid, or nearly always, you should be able to avoid the nasty weather.
See, at this moment, it's more like Oliver, our son's journey, and I do want him to sort of explore and see where he wants to go and where he wants to take us. As I give him the opportunity to see what he wants to make out of it.
Yeah.
Which I think is lovely. So I'm following like Ollie's journey and
Yeah.
see where Ollie's journey takes
That's really
us.
special,
I think it's
actually.
very special. He wants to do this.
Yes.
And hang around with his mum and dad.
Yeah, and that you will let him lead you as well.
That just sort of see how he feels and what he wants to do, and he's really keen and he's very excited and looking forward. So it should be a good adventure.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
And Sarita will come and join us over the Christmas period, wherever we are. She keeps asking, where will you be? No idea. Because unfortunately she is finishing her last year of uni, so she must finish that.
Yeah.
But yeah, she'll come and join us wherever we are.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so do you have plans to come back?
We definitely have plans to come back because we're having some sort of house project, but at the same time we have to be here for her graduation.
Yes.
Not necessarily means the boat has to come back, but depending on what we're doing, we'll bring it back and then go again or leave it somewhere. So at the moment, basically, I am no worry about the journey. Let's just sort of set off and enjoy. We just finished doing lots of racing, Grand Britain Island race, and then we also have another boat, the Firebird, another catamaran, and Rupert has been doing racing with them in Falmouth Week. So we're just sort of getting our head together to sort of say, okay, now we're organizing this boat to be ready to go, and then let's just go.
Just leave it open.
Leave it open, and having Alan and Sheila, like Rupert mentioned, join us is an amazing. I could not be more happier with better people to do it, who not only their experiences in sailing, but they're part of the family, then we get along really well. They're godparents to our children, and having Alan with Oliver also sharing and teaching him and helping him through, I think it's going to be very special having his dad and Alan for him, so it will be great.